modern driver. Being a shot maker at heart, my intrigue was engaged. My imagination was further captured as I noticed the club maker's name on the face. Sweet Spot was etched into the rich persimmon.
Hello there, and welcome to the
revealing
golf
that the
club.
club
Good
maker
to see
understood.
ya.
I
Let's
felt
play
a
some golf.
connection to this pioneer in club design. As we walked to the ball, Johnny reminded me once again of the goal. That shot was well executed, but I don't care about the outcome of the shots today. I am only interested in the input, period. Looked to me like your checklist was flawless. Good job. The 7 clubs consisted of 2 woods, 3 irons, a wedge, and a putter. I found my ball about 150 yards out. Johnny said that the irons were similar to a 3, 5, and 7, subtracting about 10% for distance. I normally hit a 7 about 170 yards,
Looks
so I
like you'll
chose
be
it,
in the short stuff
figuring
here.
the 10% should get me in the ballpark. I called for a slight fade, knowing that I would need the ball to sit softly to stay on the tiny green.
And from here,
The well-worn grip
we're
revealed
right
that this
around
club had a
170
full
yards
life. I wondered to myself if it had ever been gripped by a pro, if it had ever contributed to a tournament victory. As I looked down at the rusty old blade, I was shocked at the thin profile. There was no question that perimeter weighting was a foreign thought at the birth of this toe-heavy design. The sweet spot on the irons was sure to be the size of a dime. Once again, the checklist dictated my approach. As if at the keyboard on a computer, I entered the data. See, feel, and trust. As before, the sound the club made was unfamiliar, but the feel was pure. The ball reacted like a knockdown 9, taking a long first hop before reaching the green. It came to rest about 15 feet beyond the hole, leaving a slow downhiller, an oxymoron in most golf venues. Johnny handed me the long putter as we reached the green. I had thought deeply about what Johnny had said 2 days ago.
solid swing.
Maybe this was the future of putting. I was open to trying it out. After all, putting had been the least consistent part of my game. Using my new SFT coin, I marked the ball, wiping off the accumulated moisture from the dew-laden green. The putt ran downhill with a slight break to the left. I replaced the ball and took a couple of practice strokes while looking face-on at the hole. I tried to calculate how hard I must hit this putt, since the head of the putter seemed a little lighter than mine. I thought of how slow the green must be, yet it went downhill. My head was full of calculations as I stood over the putt. The putter moved back as my mind said, the putter is light, the green is wet, and the grass is long. Make sure to hit it harder than would seem necessary. With that great inner coaching, I put a little extra effort into the hit to make sure the ball would get to the hole. It rocketed off the face of the putter, failing to take the break, and ran past the hole a good 6 feet. A terrible putt, I said to myself. Johnny seemed to be amused as he stood with his hand on his chin, those steely eyes of wisdom waiting for my reaction. Uncomfortable with the silence, I let
After
my
the
mouth
first
run.
hole, even par.
Caught all of that one, didn't I? I guess it's going to take a few holes to figure out
And
the pace of the
second
greens
hole
and to
coming
get
up.
used to the future of putting, I blurted out in my defense. Bravo, bravo, Johnny sarcastically bellowed. You play the victim well. Excellent acting. Great blaming. Bravo, bravo, he said as he paused for effect. You just reverted to an also-ran, a wannabe, one of the myriad who will remain ordinary, and it only took 3 shots. I wanted to crawl into a hole and hide. I wanted to be miles from this place. It was only minutes ago that I thought this was going to be a special day. What a wimp I was. Before you beat yourself up, which has no value or place in this game, he said, cutting my self-pity off at the pass, let's just look at the truth. I have one simple question, he continued. What is our one goal today? I thought back to our conversation on the tee. Johnny's challenge to me was to focus on the process, the checklist. Our goal was simple, stay with the process on each shot. I replied, is to commit to the checklist on each shot. See, feel, and trust. Did you? He asked calmly. I felt as if I needed to adjust my feel. Since these were unfamiliar greens, this was an unfamiliar club, I began. So I focused on calculating feel rather than going through the checklist. To be honest, instinct took over and I just forgot the checklist. Instinct? Johnny questioned. Don't you mean intellect? You see, what we are after is indeed instinct. What you did is trump instinct with calculations. Your intellect, your need for control, and your fear of failing took over. He continued, the truth is you didn't believe enough in your instincts to let them take over. That's all. You didn't hit a bad putt. You hit the exact putt you calculated. You aren't a bad putter, and this isn't a difficult method. You're a bad chooser. You chose intellect over feel. You are back to counting steps instead of dancing. It is inferior at your level. Can you see? I hear what you're saying. My heart says you're right, but my mind is trained to take over. How can I change? I pleaded. You have the answer. You tell me, he returned. Commit to the checklist, I answered, and then continued.
Yes.
Can it really be that simple? Simple is relative, he said.
And that'll
Simple in
keep
concept,
you at even
difficult in
par.
practice.
Nice.
But you have the answer to that as well. If you take the challenge and keep
All
track
right,
of your progress
let's
on
let
the
her rip.
scorecard, you will have dialed into the surefire way to stay accountable. Let's finish the hole, and I will demonstrate. I still had a 6-footer uphill with a little break to the right. This time I was committed to letting go and seeing what would happen. I let go of all excuses, including the newness of the method and the length of the grass. I simply observed and sensed. I let the genius of my eyes and mind compute. Something clicked, maybe for the first time in my life. It was the idea of let. I am not sure I had ever truly let go during a scoring round in my life. I had lived a life of control on the course. Maybe on the range I let go a little, but I can't say it was a habit.
Great contact.
Control was always nearby. It was as if a light switch had been turned on in a long-forgotten room. It was the room of sensation, a room where all the senses live.
Okay, looking at,
Intellect hid
I'd
them
say
there long
180
ago,
yards out.
afraid that they would undermine order and structure. There was too much on the line to let go. It would be irresponsible not to work at it and make it happen. By letting, I could sense the speed and brake. My body absorbed the information and did the work for me, bypassing, for all practical purposes, intellect. I moved into my checklist. I said, see it, and traced an image from ball to the hole. I said, feel it, and sensed the perfect stroke needed to make the putt I saw happen. I said, trust it, and let the putter head move. The putt happened. It wasn't forced or controlled. It wasn't coerced. There was no wishing or hoping involved.
Nice
The putt
approach
responded
on the
perfectly
green.
and fell to
Well
the
done.
bottom of the
All
hole.
right, this next one's for
In
birdie.
that one putt, I realized that a putt is a sensation, nothing more. Intellect could never do what sensation just produced. Furthermore, intellect could never describe the sweet spot. It can only be sensed. Johnny could tell that a light had just come on. I could see him try to hide his wry smile as he turned and walked towards the next tee box. Write down your 2 scores before we think about this next hole, he coached as I climbed up the turtleback known as the second tee box. I wrote down a 4 for the score and a 3 for the process.
Okay, 1 under for the
I failed to
round.
go through the process on the first putt. You could do better than 75%, he said as he handed me the driver.
Okay, here we
You have
go.
100% control of the process. It is all about mental toughness. Let's see what you're made of. I looked at the hole before me. It was the hole of the Great Oak, the one we painted on Wednesday. The hole was about 380 yards long. Trees lined the left side. The right was open all the way to the huge oak, which lay about 270 yards from the tee. My strategy was to keep the ball down the left side to avoid the tree, which stretched its arms across the entire right rough and 1/4 of the fairway. The wind was blowing left to right about 15 miles per hour. Since I normally played a fade, I would be challenged, especially since the trees lined the left side. I would have to play a controlled draw that leaned back into the left to right wind. I chose
no
my
good.
target and called my shot from behind the ball. I walked into the shot and set my club to the target. As I looked out to the target, I said the word, see. As I looked back to the ball and made a waggle, I felt the sensation of perfect timing and tempo, along with a slightly in-to-out swing. I looked back to the target and held my focus with an aggressive posture as I said the word, feel. As my eyes returned to the ball, I whispered the word, trust, as the club moved off the ball with no hesitation. I let my body work and once again sensed the essence of the game. The shot began as planned, but the wind overcame the lean of the draw. On its descent, the ball began to drift to the right slightly. It hit the center of the rock-hard fairway and bounded forward and hard to the right. It came to rest about 20 yards behind the oak on the right side of the fairway. Johnny let out a chuckle and said, "The Oak is a champion at getting the first-time player. That's why we held art class there on Wednesday." Changing the subject, he asked as he headed for the ball, "Did you accomplish your purpose on that
Could be
shot?"
in the rough here.
I was about to say no because I failed to hit my target. But I was learning that
Well,
his
you're
simple
in
questions
the
were
deep
deceiving.
stuff here. I think they
thought
call
about
this
my
the
purpose.
cabbage.
I was to go through my
Let's
process
just try
on
to make
every
some
shot,
solid
which I did.
contact and get that ball
As I
headed in
handed
the
Johnny
right
the driver,
direction.
I said, "Yes." He looked pleased as he asked what I was going to do next. I said with an air of confidence, "Enjoy the walk in utopia. Enjoy our conversation, and look forward to the next shot." Without missing a step, Johnny said, "You're good, son. You're really good." I could tell that he knew that I knew, and that my life was indeed changing. My golfing mind had been reborn. I was a different person from the empty shell of a man
Well, looks
that had
like
shown
this
up
may
on
be in the
Sunday
deep
evening.
stuff.
He continued, "Remember, the checklist puts you into position to hit the best shot at any given time. It doesn't guarantee perfection. It just increases your odds for hitting the shot you picture. You always want the odds in your favor. Once you have done that, react and move on." He slapped me on the back and said, "You are well on your way to greatness. Be expectant. Here's a thought for you that will serve you well on your journey." He proceeded to share one of his many simple but profound quotes. "Always set an extra place at the dinner table, so when destiny comes knocking at your door, you invite him in as though you have been expecting him." Johnny had a way with words. He also had a way with timing. In the silence of the next 20 seconds, as we walked to the
36-footer
ball,
here. Let's see
his
what he can
quote
do.
sunk deep, touching and inspiring the source of greatness, a seed that had been sown earlier in my life, but had failed to be watered. It was a seed born out of childhood stories of valor and heroism, knights in shining armor and warriors riding upon white horses. The hero was always prepared. When his number was called, with much confidence and skill, he struck down his foe with great expectation of victory. In my heart of hearts, I wanted to be one of them. But somewhere along the way, I slammed this door, hearing only the voice that said, "You are ordinary. Extraordinary is only for the books." But this week, a story was being written, and expectations were increasing. As we approached the ball, my thoughts returned to the round in front of me. I had indeed enjoyed the conversation between shots. It was about
Sitting
10
at
feet left
1
of the
over for
site
the
of my
round.
masterpiece. I swear this man was a genius or a prophet. Jury's still out on
Okay,
which.
fifth hole coming
How in
up.
the world could he have anticipated this? My mind returned to the painting and the shot I hit on Wednesday. The only difference was that I was in the fairway. There was a little more wind, and I didn't have my clubs. The 5-iron in this set looked to have more loft, so I went with the 3-iron, called a mid-iron by the club maker. It looked and felt like a 4-iron. I would just have to trust it. Novel thought, I thought to myself. Once I chose the club, I stood behind the ball and called my shot. I saw a low slice under and around the tree, taking a few hops and then running up on the green. I could see the red shot line from the painting all the way to the pin set in the back right. I approached the ball and set the club. The top line of this club was also razor thin, an anomaly in today's market. I looked to the target and said the word "see" as I took a waggle. I looked to the ball and
Yeah, I
adjusted
think
my
you
feet,
might have hit a tree
keeping
there.
them dynamic through my routine. I looked to the target and repeated
If the
the
ball's
word
sitting above your
"field."
feet here,
I
that
remembered the
tends to make you want
sensation
to
of the word
pull
"let"
the shot
on
a
the
little bit.
previous putt. I let the painting of Wednesday emerge. I let the shot cover me. I simply let go and let instinct take over. I returned my eyes to the ball as I said the word "trust," allowing the shot to happen. The shot came off low and sliced to the right. It flew under the limbs about 65 yards out, spinning to the right and catching a little grass to halt its momentum. It rolled up on the fringe, slowing as it headed for the pin. For a moment, it looked as if it was really going in. It trickled just past the hole,
Nice.
leaving 6 feet for birdie. "Picasso," I thought to myself. Johnny responded by asking, "Is that piece of art for sale?" "I would like to hang it over the mantel," he continued with a smile. "I want to buy your art before the public catches on, and I can't afford it." "By the way," he taught, "the only thing more powerful than calling your shot is recalling a shot. What you just did is recall the shot from Wednesday. Always savor your shots so you can take advantage of this most powerful tool in your armor, the recall." He handed me the face-on putter as I walked to the green, feeling as if I were in Never Never Land. I had never felt these sensations on the course, and furthermore, I was using ancient tools to produce uncanny results. I could sense that this was no ordinary day. I could also sense Johnny was no ordinary man. He found a way to unlock hidden treasure, release latent talent, and water forgotten seeds of expectation. I thought philosophically for a moment. Don't we all need a Johnny in our lives? Where are all the Johnnies? Have we run them off, choosing instead Band-Aid cures and swing gadgets, slick technology, and the flavor of the month swing guru? In a larger sense, where have the Johnnies gone in our world?
Well, you're out of the
We
sand.
teach to
That's
the
all,
test in education.
that's all you can ask
We hire
for.
new employees only to throw them to the wolves. We hold organizations sacred and leave it all on the court for these meaningless entities, yet the hearts of men and women remain imprisoned for the lack of wisdom being shared. Where is wisdom these days? Who is teaching wisdom? I never had a course in it, but this week my life had been altered because of it. I thought of the multitude of unsung heroes that seek to teach wisdom in the small forgotten communities, the true utopias of the land. Maybe that is why cowboy poetry is capturing the imagination of so many these days. Johnny could sense the questions inside. He could see the pieces coming together in his student. In his heart, he knew that his purpose was being met. He was a rancher at heart, and ranchers know about seed seasons. When a seed is sown in the right season,
2 over
its
for the
yield is
round.
great. Johnny was watching his crop with much anticipation. Without speaking a word, he grabbed the flag
Okay,
and
it's
moved
time to
out of the
send
way.
this ball on its
I
way.
watched him carefully as he walked away. I was in awe of a man who would give a stranger a week of his time and a lifetime of wisdom. Finally, I turned to the ball. I let the face-on method enter and take root. I assumed the identity of a great putter. Because of wisdom shared, the seed of revolution had been planted. I didn't know when, but I did know that I would indeed unveil this method in a tournament someday. In the meantime, my putt hit dead center, and we walked to the next tee, where I wrote down 2 scores. Art continued to unfold, hole after hole. Words became fewer and fewer between us, for all the teaching had transferred. An epic was underway, and the force of wisdom combined with latent talent brought out a storyline for the ages. When the sun was setting beyond the falling of the final putt, I'd set a course record. While I stayed in the present over each shot, the irony was that I did it with the help of ancient hickory, trees felled over 100 years ago, and by embracing the future of putting. But the hero of the day was wisdom, a forgotten tool passed from one generation to the next on an ordinary day in an extraordinary place called the Links of Utopia. As I leaned against my car while changing shoes, passion for my future returned. I was impressed with my round and the extraordinary happenings of the week.
9-footer here, I think.
I had
think
come
you can
here
do this.
desperate for hope, and it had been given. I had been desperate for answers to golf's most baffling challenges, and I found them. I had been in need of a mentor, and he showed up. With tears in my eyes, I thanked Johnny for all he had given. Knowing my time with him was done, I asked, what do I owe? After all, what else could he teach me? I had just set a record with antique clubs on a course I had never seen just 1 week after my worst defeat. Son, he said with a look of someone hiding a great secret, here, this face-on putter is for you. Destiny will knock when it is time to unveil it in tournament play. And secondly, I said 7 days, not 6. I will see you here in the cemetery at daybreak for our final
Sitting
lesson.
at 3 over.
He fired up his
for the
tractor
round
and
here.
headed for home, leaving me looking into the cemetery at sunset and wondering
All
what
right,
tomorrow
let's let her
would
rip.
bring. Chapter 9. Buried Lies. The next morning, as the sun was peeking over the horizon, I checked out of the Utopia on the River Lodge. It had become a sanctuary for me at the end of each day. I spent several hours during the past week walking and reflecting along the Sabinal River beneath the century-old cypress trees. The absence of a phone and the solitude became a blessing. I had somehow been led to this place at a critical juncture in my life. I headed north to the Waresville turnoff. Driving up the one-lane road, my mind was full of anticipation.
Well, I guess you can't hit
How
all the
could
fairways.
anything top off my round yesterday?
I think you might have hit a
The knowledge
tree
I received
there.
this week had changed how I felt about my career forever. What more could Johnny have to offer? I pulled up to the cemetery and parked next to Johnny's tractor. Johnny had arrived some time earlier. He was deep in thought, hardly noticing my arrival as he moved slowly through the engraved granite epitaphs of those who had gone before us. It was a small, well-kept cemetery, surrounded on three sides by a white picket fence with an old, crumbling stone wall at the entrance. The cemetery was shaded by the arms of the valley's largest oaks. Though the journey of life for some had ended here, I felt a great sense of security in this place. Johnny motioned for me to come in. His hand was wrapped in a blood-stained red bandana. He said that he had cut it while moving some rocks earlier in the morning. I could see the fresh dirt on the other hand, revealing that a rancher's work was never done, even on the morning of the Sabbath. I soon would find out the nature of his work on this Sabbath. He drew my attention to one of the headstones. The epitaph read, "Though he never earned a degree, he was wise. Though
Back
he never
on
left
the
the Seven
fairway
Isle Valley,
now. Good
he
stuff.
impacted the world.
All right, looking at
Though he died
120
young,
yards or so
with
to
Christ
the pin.
he lives." We walked past several others that simply had faceless names devoid of comments, with two dates separated by a dash. He stopped and pointed to another. The dates on the stone read April 10th, 1901 through June 7th, 1901. The epitaph read, "Like a spring bluebonnet in the valley, our precious April bloomed in glorious splendor. She was chosen for heaven's bouquet after a brief but fragrant stay in the garden of Utopia." I thought of what it must have been like to lose a child. I looked down and shuffled the grass with the soles of my shoes, my heart heavy. Then I trudged slowly after Johnny. Finally, Johnny knelt before what looked like the oldest and smallest stone in the cemetery. He took off his hat
Sweet.
and used it to dust off the
And
engraving.
for the bird.
"This is my favorite," he said. The moisture in his eyes glistened in the early morning sunlight as he read out loud, 1875 to 1941, my daddy. We both stared at the two words for several minutes. This man's entire life was defined for us in these two simple words. I felt privileged to be in the presence of this grave. There was something in these words that moved both of us to the core. I noticed that a new grave had been dug near the picket fence on the side next to the driving range. There was fresh dirt on the shovel, which was leaning against a nearby tree next to an unfinished headstone. I could see only one date etched in the natural river rock, chosen to serve as a reminder to the world of this person's
Okay,
life.
let's see what you can do with his
The unfinished
8-footer.
date etched in the stone was 1979. I asked Johnny if he knew anything about the impending funeral. He said that it was for a young friend of his who was relatively new to the valley. The funeral would be later in the day. Johnny quietly walked over to the largest tree beside which was a small box. He sat down at the base of this mighty oak. The
Great
two
putt,
seemed like
and that
brothers
is
in so
for
many
par.
ways. I followed. We sat
And
for a
that'll
moment
keep you
in
at
silence.
3 over for the round.
Though no one was around, I felt like we had an audience. I picked up several acorns, squeezing
go.
them in my hand to
Pop this
relieve
in
a
the
little
fairway.
tension. Johnny reached inside his worn Levi's jacket and pulled from the inner pocket a small, leather-bound book. It was worn and well-read. As he held that book in his bandaged and dirt-stained hands, he paused and asked me a simple question. "What will your epitaph say?" I looked up quickly, dropping the acorns from my fingers. Johnny stared at me with those piercing but compassionate eyes. I looked away from his gaze to the many graves that surrounded us. I thought of the words from the several headstones we had just read. My young life flashed before my eyes. My thoughts were consumed for the most part by golf. After all, golf is what I did. It defined me to the point that my golf score and self-identity had merged into one. As I thought back to the question, I started to say something like, "He made it big on the PGA Tour," or "He won the U.S. Open." But before the words came out, I realized how shallow and insignificant they were in a place like this. Out of nowhere, his question had tapped into a deep well of passion of which I had been unaware. I wanted my future headstone to say something profound. When people in the future read it, I wanted them to be moved. I wanted to be remembered for something other than golf. But for what? I realized I wouldn't have any say in the matter. Those left behind would write the epitaph according to the life I had lived. Johnny knew that I was struggling. He could see clearly that my life had little in the way of foundations. I had simply
Nice
become
swing.
a golf score. If my life continued on this course, My epitaph might read, played to a +3 in golf,
Looking at a
but had a
19-foot
36
putt from here.
handicap in life. Before I could answer, he led me down another path by asking, "Why did you feel so great after yesterday's course record?" I replied that it was an example of my true potential and how hard work could pay off. I said it felt great to see shots fly so true and putts find their mark time and again, especially with the hickory clubs and a new putting method. I continued by saying that I was finally in control of my game again. Johnny stopped me before I went any further. "While that all may be true, I believe you used yesterday's fine round to validate yourself as a person." He continued, "You said that you had never felt so good about yourself as you did when you completed that round. Wasn't it just a week ago that you were devastated by a golf score?" There was a pause for reflection for both of us. "Son," he said, "you are well on your way to living a life controlled by a score. Let me let you in on a little secret. Life in the end will be measured by significance, not a golf score. Significance will be defined by your character, relationships, values, virtues, and faith, not by a golf score. The book I am holding reveals that we will all stand before our Maker someday and give an account of our life. It goes on to say that all the insignificant wood, hay, and stubble of our lives will be consumed by fire, revealing the significant costly metal and precious stones that remain unscathed
Okay,
by
so
fire.
that'll keep you at
It looks to
3
me like you
over
are
for
well
the
on your
round.
way to a bonfire of insignificance. The instrument panel of
Ninth
my
hole
life was
coming up.
going haywire. What I thought to be true north was about to let me down. I had stayed in Utopia for a week for a checkup, yet I was receiving a heart transplant. My life was being overhauled. I knew what he was saying was true, but I didn't know what to do about it. I had always believed that my calling in life was to be a golfer. I was finding out that I had sold myself short, that I could do more. The morning light was breaking through the limbs of the oak. A beam of sunlight shone directly on the black book in his hand. I could see a worn and faded cross on the binding, which revealed to me the contents. He reached his injured hand into another pocket for his reading
Whoops.
glasses. Then
Well,
he
you're
opened the
in
Bible.
the deep stuff
He asked if I
here.
would
I
be
think they call
offended
this
if he
the
read a few
cabbage.
verses from the good book.
Let's just
After
try to make
all,
some
he said
solid
this was
contact and
customary
get
for the
that ball
Bible to
headed
be
in the
read in
right
a
direction.
cemetery, especially on the day of a funeral. I had never been much of a churchgoer, especially since I played golf on Sundays, but I remembered my grandmother's funeral and how I was comforted by the words of the Bible before we laid her to rest. So I nodded for him to continue. Before he began reading, he looked directly at me and made this statement. "I am about to tell you about a man who lived many years ago, yet was at the same crossroads you are this morning. He was a performer who spent his life dreaming about
Doesn't
the
look like
big
it's on
win,
fairway, but it's
the
all
day
right.
he would be heralded as the best. He was defined by what he did, and his livelihood depended upon his performance. He was a passionate man, a contender. The only difference between you and him is that you are a golfer and he was a fisherman. His name was Simon. When you showed up earlier this week, you were devastated by a poor performance. You came by chance to my range, primed for listening and learning. In the story I am about to read to you, Simon had just fished all night but caught nothing. He was tired, hungry, and humiliated by his performance. While he was cleaning his nets near a crowd of people, he began to listen to the teacher Jesus,
To
whom
save
all the
par.
others had come to hear. Before I continue, you need to know something. While I am not a preacher, I believe with every fiber of my being that there is a God. It is almost impossible to look up at the starlit sky each night in the Utopia Valley without being overwhelmed with the majesty of his creation. I have seen his handprint upon my life over and over and felt his presence closer than the wind upon my face. I also believe that he has a plan for my life and yours. I know that our meeting was not by chance. It is our job to seek God and to listen to his calling for our lives. I believe that he sent you to me at this time in your life. You are an empty man on a journey to success, a destination that has never filled the deep longings of any man's life. You have been controlled by your performances in life and the opinion of others. You have lost sight
And
of what it
after
means to live a
9, you're
life of
not doing
significance.
too
You see,
bad. I think you could
success is a
still
destination,
maybe
while
take it up a
significance
notch through
is
the
an
back
eternal
9,
calling.
though.
I believe in the words of this book. We call them the living words of God because they change lives and give life where there was emptiness. We also call them living because they speak to each of us in a very personal and life-transforming way each time we open the pages. Because of this, the story that I am about to read you could affect you for eternity. It is up to you to listen or cast it aside. No one can make that choice but you. God gives us the grace to accept or reject him. Eternity rests on this choice.
That thing was
It is the
smashed.
profound mystery of life. Johnny asked if I were ready. My heart was racing. It's not easy being the only man in the pew. While my intellect told me to run, my heart pleaded to listen. It was starved for freedom from a prison of insignificance. I listened to my heart. After all, I am a field player. He began to read from the book of Luke in chapter 5. Simon had just finished an awful performance. He had fished all night and caught nothing. He was a talented professional whose livelihood and reputation depended largely on his ability to perform. While he was washing his nets of defeat in the early morning, he began to eavesdrop on the powerful words of a nearby teacher named Jesus. Soon Jesus stopped and looked directly at Simon, asking for his help. The people were crowding in so much that many could not hear him teach. He needed a better pulpit
I'd
from
say
which
around
to teach,
105
so West borrowed
yards
Simon's
or
boat.
so to the pin here.
Simon agreed and paddled him out a little from the shore. Jesus continued to teach as the crowd listened intently. After a while, he concluded his teaching. He now turned his focus to Simon as the conversation became very personal between two men. Jesus offered up a direct challenge to Simon. Little did Simon know that this challenge would eventually change his life and alter the course of human history. Johnny stopped for a moment to reflect out loud. I don't believe that we take into
Solid
consideration
swing.
the far-reaching effects that our everyday decisions have on our destiny, the lives of others, or the world as a whole. Johnny
This
continued his
is for
reading.
birdie.
Jesus looked Simon square in the eye and said, "Push out into the deep waters and let down your net for a catch." While all eyes of the crowd were on Simon, he felt the penetrating gaze of Jesus. What would he do? Johnny stopped again and began to conjecture. I'm sure several things ran through Simon's mind. First, he might have reasoned that he was the fisherman and that he would know more about fishing and where the fish were than Jesus would. Second, the deep waters presented a significant risk to a small boat. Out there, the storms came up at a moment's notice. The waves are big and the winds are dangerous. Third, this was his boat. He was the captain. He always called the shots. What would it say to the people if he gave in, especially if he failed or got caught in a storm? Johnny said, "It's no different for you. The decision facing you is basically about who is the captain
Okay,
of
let's
your
see
ship."
what you can do with his 8-footer.
Johnny had slipped me into the story. Indeed, I was facing the same challenge as Simon. Johnny continued with the story. Simon answered the challenge by saying that he had competed hard all night and experienced great failure. In fact, hours of effort had ended in complete futility. Simon, in a move that probably surprised even himself, then said, "However, because you asked, I will." It was an act of faith and obedience to the teacher, Johnny said with deep feeling. Even though conventional wisdom frowned on taking the small vessel out into the deep,
Well done.
there was
We're in the
something
hole.
about Jesus that stirred the heart of Simon. His
Okay,
teaching,
so
his
that'll keep you at
countenance,
4
his
over
personal
for the
challenge
round.
all moved Simon to trust. Little did he know that because the
Coming
voice
off
of the
a
master
par
came
on the
from within
last
the
one.
boat,
Let's see what
there
happens
was
here.
ultimately no risk involved in this venture. Jesus was going with him. The real risk was not to go. Johnny continued. Simon paddled out into the deep, a speck on the horizon for those on the shore. He then let down the nets and experienced something he had always dreamed of. He witnessed the greatest success of his career. The success was so overwhelming that he signaled to his partners to help with the catch. They caught so many fish that both boats began to sink. Johnny mused, "Sounds like a course record to me, and with unconventional clubs, I might add." After this interjection, he continued teaching. It
All
was
right, looking
during
good
this
so
dream
far.
come true, at the moment of his greatest triumph, that a paradigm shift took place. Simon realized for the first time that he was in the presence of the author of success. This
Okay,
teacher was
you're
indeed
about
who he said he
140
was,
yards out here.
the Son of God. Simon's response was one of awe and fear as he fell to his knees among the mess of fish, sensing for the first time in his life that there was a God and that he was in the boat with God's Son. When a person has that experience, The Bible says that the scales of unbelief begin to fall from their eyes, and they see for the first time the enormous chasm that exists between a holy God and a sinful man. Initially, Simon was so overwhelmed that all he could do was beg the teacher to leave. Johnny's voice cracked as he said, "It was then that Jesus reached out his hand to Simon and said, 'Don't be afraid.'"
On the green,
Johnny
with
said as
some
he
work to
cleared
do.
his throat,
Okay,
"Have
we're
you ever
about
been
17
afraid?
feet out here.
I have lived long enough to see tough men cry. I have seen champions tremble. I have seen way too many unbelievers face death alone. He is holding out his hand to you. Don't miss his grasp." Johnny paused and wiped his brow with his blood-stained bandana. He took a sip from his thermos and then continued. He lowered the Bible and looked at me with the seriousness of a surgeon with good news. Not only was the teacher the author of success, he was and is the remover of fear. While life is tough and the prospects of dying someday even tougher, the teacher offered ultimate security in an insecure world. Then Jesus presented a call, which is the same to all of us. "Follow me, and I will make you a fisher of men."
And that'll keep you
Jesus
at
gave
4
Simon an
over for
offer
this
of a
round.
life of significance. Would he take the challenge? Would he follow the call? Or
Coming
would he
off
stay
a
with the
par
fish,
on the
seeing
last
them
one.
as the
Let's see
path
what
to
happens here.
opportunity and fulfillment? Johnny closed the book. He looked at me and began to share his challenge to me. When you showed up, you were devastated because of a game called golf, a game that had all the makings of your God. When you discovered new insights into the game this week, your talent was unleashed, and you saw a glimpse of your true potential. When you experienced this new success, your body embraced it like a narcotic. You were on a high. The high based on a golf score would soon have worn away, possibly during the next round, maybe before. Like an alcoholic in need of a drink, you would spend the rest of your life trying to get a high from your score. Your life would be a series of ups and downs, a life consumed by the fear of failure.
This one's looking like
This
around
consuming
220
drive
to
would
the
hide
pin.
God's true calling in your life, and you would be well on your way to a meaningless, powerless, and insignificant headstone. But the good news is that you are at a crossroads. You have the choice of taking a very different road. On this new road, you leave the fear of failure in the dust. Your identity is not tied to a game, but to God. You will find your purpose not in a game or a score, but in a calling that has eternal implications. The Bible states that this road leads to heaven, and that faith is the fuel that moves us from
Could be
mile
in the
marker
rough here.
to mile marker. The first step is to realize that there is a God and He is calling you to an adventure. The second step is to ask Him to forgive the sins that has kept you from this road in the past. The third step is to get in the boat with the Master, make Him the captain, and push out into the deep waters. He will tell you where to fish. The outcome is in His hands, not yours. The fear of failure will be removed from your performance. Success will no longer be the goal. Significance in the process of fishing will hold all the emotions that you have longed for, namely peace, patience, and significance. I was speechless. I could sense the truth. My heart was screaming, "Open the prison door," but my mind was racing. How? Johnny's quiet,
Okay,
earnest
so
voice broke
that'll
my
keep you at
internal
4
conversation.
over for the round.
I'm going to leave you alone with your thoughts. If you choose to go down this new
13th
road,
hole
I want
coming
you to
up.
do something before you leave this place. Earlier in the week, we worked on buried lies. I want you to revisit that lesson in a new way. Inside this box is a pencil and 2 pieces of paper. Write down the lies that you have learned along your journey in life, those lies that you have established in your heart, even though the weight of them has been crushing your soul. He watched me nod, then continued. On the second piece of paper, I want you to write the truths of God's Word that you have heard today. These truths will set you free and will establish a new calling in your life, one that will begin to rewrite the epitaph of your life. He stood, dusted himself off, and tucked his Bible back into the inner pocket of his jacket.
And did you hit
As
that
he
hard enough?
towered over me, he gave me a final task. When you have finished that task, your week here will nearly be complete. I want you to take the buried lies you have written, put them in the box, and carry them over to the grave that has been prepared for this occasion. As you kneel next to the gravesite, ask God to forgive you for running in the wrong direction. Ask that He lead you down this new road through faith in His Son, and tell Him that you are ready to follow Him as you give Him the helm of your boat. Once you have prayed, Take the shovel next to the tree and fill in the hole, putting to death the old lies that propelled you toward a life of insignificance. The Bible says that a man
10-footer
must be
here. This is
born again
makeable.
and must become a new creation. I have already chiseled in your birthday. You take the hammer and chisel and add the date that you laid the old lies to rest and were born again. You can chisel an epitaph if you like. Place the stone on the grave as a reminder of your new life and follow God's lead as you leave this place. Johnny must have seen the inner turmoil in my eyes. He gave me a strong bear hug, jumped up on his tractor and said, "See it, feel it, trust it. See his love, feel his presence, and trust his word." He drove off,
Sitting
leaving me
at
alone in the
5
cemetery
over
with
for
an
the
open
round.
grave. I knew that I had a choice, that I was at a crossroads.
Okay, let's put this
The
drive
week
in the
began at a
fairway.
fork in the road and ended at another. I knew he was right, but the questions began to bombard my mind. What will everyone think? What if I do this and God isn't there? What if this has all been another psychological ploy just to get me to change? Then I remembered his words. This is a matter of faith. Faith to me had always meant to believe in something that you couldn't see. But when I contemplated this week, I could see evidence of God. Not only had I miraculously chosen to turn to utopia at the fork in the road, I had met Johnny and had witnessed God in his life. Even more compelling, the words of the Bible came alive. The story of Simon was my story. I just hadn't gotten into the boat yet. I wondered if I could catch some fish if I moved out into the deep. Like Simon, I took the challenge. I was tired of the empty road I had
That's
traveled.
unfortunate.
It was exhausting and devoid of meaning. I slowly opened the box to find 2 pieces of paper, a pencil, and a small black Bible identical to Johnny's. I was surprised to see my name embossed on the cover. There was a note attached to the Bible that read, "I knew you would make the right choice. Once you have written down the truths, fold them up and put them in your Bible. As you learn new truths, add to your list until you need a notebook to keep up with the blessings that God will shower upon you as you let down your nets for a catch." I took the piece of paper and the pencil and began to search
Very
my heart for the
nice.
buried lies.
This one's for Birdie.
I found several. 1. My golf scores are a reflection of my self-worth. Number 2, failure in golf is failure in life. Number 3, success in golf will bring the fulfillment that I long for. Number 4, my calling in life is to play golf. Number 5, the opinions of others are paramount in the choices I make. God is a crutch for the weak, that being number 6. And number 7, tradition is sacred and never to be challenged. I opened the box and placed the buried lies inside. I replaced the lid and carried the box toward the open grave. I now knew why Johnny's hand was bleeding. The blood-stained shovel handle revealed the gravedigger's identity. I tossed the box of lies into the grave as the rustle of leaves and twinkle of sunlight applauded my action. I knelt down, feeling a bit awkward. I began a conversation
Okay,
with
so
God.
that'll keep you
I
at
asked his
5
forgiveness
over
for
for the
putting the
round.
game before him and for seeking fulfillment on a road leading away from his calling.
Okay, here we
I
go.
thanked him for his son, who gave his life for me. And then, in a promise I thought I would never make, I gave up control of my life. By faith, I had handed over the reins of my life. I pushed out into the deep. I lifted my eyes to heaven. My face was caressed by the gentle hill country breeze. The fragrance of fresh-cut hay was like honey to my senses. The sun warmed my back as it streamed through the great oak's thick branches. I felt a peace deep in the longings of my parched soul. I experienced for the first time in my life the freedom that came from knowing the truth. Silence enveloped me. If only this moment could have lasted forever. I could hear the voice of God whisper my name in the deafening silence. I noticed the true work of his artist's hand as I took in the landscape as a new creature. The scales fell off of my eyes, revealing his handprint on everything I saw. A miracle was taking place, and it had nothing to do with a recovery shot to the green. The buried lies were being replaced by a flood of truth. It was like cool summer rains, bringing life and hope where drought had ravaged the terrain. A transformation was taking place that cannot be put in words. A dry spring was beginning to flow. The shovel stood against an oak, beckoning me to finish the job. As I touched the blood-stained handle, my knees buckled to the earth. Emotion overwhelmed me. Tears burst from my eyes as I
Solid
thought of
swing.
the two men who intercepted me along the road to insignificance. I thought of Johnny, whose blood was shed during the digging of this grave, a man who had followed his calling by investing in me this week. I also thought of the captain of my ship, the man who shed his blood for me on the cross so many years ago. My shoulders were heaving, and I shed enough tears to fill the grave. I was thankful. I was overwhelmed with the thought of how easy it would have been to miss this chance meeting. I could still see the sign at the fork in the road last Sunday. I chose Utopia because of the name, but hoping for more. I was not disappointed. At the lowest point in my life, God led me to Utopia. With every shovel of dirt tossed onto the box of lies, I felt a sense of freedom emerging. I couldn't shovel fast enough. I hardly noticed the blisters forming on my hand. I was done with the past and ready for a new beginning. Finally, out of breath, hands bleeding and drenched in sweat, I stamped down the dirt. It was time to chisel the headstone. While hammering the second significant date of my life, I left more than a few pieces of my flesh upon the stone. This was a new task with foreign tools. I saw these as wounds of passage. I thought long and hard about an epitaph that would be appropriate for my journey. Johnny's parting words loomed as the only choice. To rid the soul of buried lies, there is only one hope. See his love, feel his presence,
Hope
trust
this one
his
bites.
word. Chapter 10, A New Voice. Leaving the cemetery,
6
I headed
over
north
for the
toward Austin,
round.
the newest side of the PGA Tour's Texas Open. I'm signed up for the Monday qualifier at Morris
16th
Williams,
hole coming up.
an old, worn-out course that has hosted much of the history of golf in Texas. Affectionately named Mo Willie, this course put the University of Texas golf team on the map. Armed with a new perspective on life and a revamped mental game, I anticipated the round like a lion waking up hungry and ready to hunt. With no fear of failure, my car headed for a new destiny. There simply is no power in life like having the right competitive perspective, coupled with a bulletproof mental strategy. For the first time in my life, my compass was pointing to true north. After checking into the Holiday Inn Express and having some barbecue at the county line, I wrote a script for the next day's round.
Good stuff.
While the course was familiar, I wanted to be ready when the spikes went on. My script described two goals: keep the game in perspective and see it, feel it, and trust it on every shot. I also stopped in the pro shop along the way and picked up a traditional short putter to go along with the face-on putter Johnny had given me. While I knew I would putt face-on in the near future, I would wait for the knock of destiny. In the meantime, I removed my 2-iron, making room for both putters. I'm sure I was the only player in the tournament carrying 2 putters. The Monday qualifier found me in a field of nearly 144 players. It seemed that every scratch golfer in Texas was chasing his dream this week. I continued to remind myself to play my own game. After all, Johnny said there is only one thing in golf that you control, and that is your thoughts. With my new confidence, I attacked the course from the first shot. There was no holding back. With 3 early birdies, I turned the front in 3 under. I knew that it was no time to play not to lose, so I continued to hunt rather than be hunted. On the back, I was so focused on the mental
Looks like
routine
this may
that
be
I
in the
lost
deep
track
stuff.
of my score, a state that I had seldom, if ever, achieved in my former life.
Oh, look at
In the
you
scorer's tent, I
skirting
added up the
danger out
numbers
there.
and
I
checked
stand
in with my
corrected.
scorekeeper. This was the easiest 65 I ever shot. There were 2 64s, leaving me the third spot of 4. I was in the Texas Open. There was no question that I was a new person. While every old instinct in my body wanted to fantasize about winning this tournament, the wisdom that I learned from Johnny fought back with a vengeance. I was committed to playing with a new purpose, one with eternal significance. I was pushing out into the deep and letting down my nets for a catch, and I knew that I wasn't doing it
Did you
alone.
get all of that?
The field would be equalized this week, as the tournament had been moved from its original site in San Antonio to the new TPC course in Austin. Everyone would be playing it for the first time. I liked the way the course forced you to hit it each way and had plenty of risk-reward holes. I couldn't wait for the games to begin. While this tournament figured as one of the biggest of my life, I was supremely calm. The first 2 days I was paired with Joe. a player known for his hot temper.
7
I
over
prepared
for the
this
round.
distraction ahead of time in my script. He had no power over me or my focus unless I granted it
Coming
to him.
off a bit of a
Following my
bogey on
game
that
plan,
last hole.
I
Let's see
played
if we
two
can do
nice
better
rounds
here.
of golf. Not many putts fell with my traditional putter, but I was patient, knowing it was just a matter of time. I also had been practicing the face-on method each evening in my motel room, knowing its time would come. My concentration score remained flawless, providing a great source of strength even as Joe went berserk several times, especially coming down the stretch. Crucial mistake on the final hole sealed his fate. I sensed that God had put him in my group as a reminder of where I had been headed. This guy was so wrapped up in his score and his failures that he had lost touch with his talent. I experienced something else for the first time. I had compassion for him.
Oops.
I had never had compassion for a competitor before, especially one as explosive and rude as Joe. But something within my spirit saw through his rough exterior. I saw a lost and angry man. While he would never admit it, he desperately needed a friend. I finished the 2 days at 2 under, making the cut by 1. 8 under was leading. After signing my card, I was instinctively about to head for the range, but something within my spirit led me in a different direction. Since Sunday, it seemed as though there was a new voice leading me, and I welcomed it. I instead headed for the parking lot to find my angry colleague. I saw Joe standing behind an older model sports car. I could tell that the car had a lot of miles on it. It reminded me of a car I had driven in college when my image needed the help of a certain kind of vehicle. When I reached him, he was slamming the trunk as if he hoped it would never open again. I didn't know what I was going to say. I had never approached a player in this kind of mindset before. There was a good chance that he might explode in anger at me. This was a new territory for me. I was in the deep water. With sincerity in my heart, I simply said, "I know how you feel. Can I buy you dinner?" Joe looked dumbfounded and said, "Yes." He said that he had already paid for his room for the night and didn't know what he was going to do next. We decided on a steakhouse and headed out in separate cars. It was the beginning of a new journey of significance for me. During dinner, Joe began to tell me his story, privilege that I was to experience many more times in my new life. People all have stories. They just don't have many listeners. Thus, the stories go unheard. I saw why he was so angry and explosive on the course. He had recently gone through a separation with his wife and 2 young
Sitting
children.
at 10
A
over
divorce was staring
for
him
the
in the
round.
face. His wife couldn't tolerate his obsession with the game at the expense of
Let's
his
put
family.
this ball down in the
She and the
fairway.
children loved him deeply, but his ever-increasing moodiness caused an emotional roller coaster when he was home. They had begun to fear him. Not only had golf become his identity, it controlled his emotions, leaving his family estranged from the man they used to know and the man they desperately needed to love again. Joe finished his stories with tears in his eyes, revealing the pain that lurked just beyond the anger. He said he would like to change, but golf was all he knew. He didn't know how to harness its emotional grip. For an instant, I hated golf for the
Great
devastation it
contact.
had wreaked on this man's family. But I also knew the game was not to blame. Joe had to take responsibility, and, like us all, he needed a coach. He needed a coach with wisdom who wasn't
Okay,
too
boats,
busy or preoccupied to share.
190
Wasn't I
yards to
just
go
asking
here.
that question earlier in the week? Where had all the Johnnies gone? We sat in silence for a minute. He broke the awkwardness by apologizing for ruining my evening. I immediately thanked him for the privilege of hearing his story. Then I asked him the question that Johnny had asked me only a few days earlier. If you died today, what would your wife and kids write on your tombstone? Without hesitating, he said that they would probably leave it blank. I have hurt them so much that they wouldn't know what to say. How does that make you feel? I asked. He answered, "My life is empty. That blank space on my tombstone would say it all.
Doesn't look like it's on the
Golf
fairway,
just
but
hasn't
it's all right.
delivered." My adrenaline was pumping as I felt this newfound tug inside my heart to share my story. He listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine. I knew the feeling. I had been in his shoes just a few days ago, desperate for hope. After we finished our dinner and I paid the check, we went to a nearby Walmart where Joe insisted on buying a shovel and a Bible. He was on a mission to bury the lies that were snuffing out his game and his marriage. His only thought was of seeking reconciliation. first with God and second with his wife and children. I headed to my motel with a precious gift of significance flooding my heart. It was a high like I had never experienced. An eternal blessing had just flowed through my life for the
All right,
first time.
10 over par is where you
I
end
had
up today.
indeed become a giant.
Thanks for the round.
Even more
I enjoyed
amazing was that I was